kind of going off the hybridized and unhybridized wheat, I did make a einkorn bread. It's a yeasted bread, and I actually cooked millet and sunflower seeds to put inside them. And so this is the original wheat. If you guys would like to pass it around and taste it.
You said a honeycomb bread?
No, it's a einkorn. Einkorn is a, yeah, it's the original wheat of which.
And if you put the einkorn next to the wheat on the plates, you can see what they've done to wheat. It's like the turkeys that have been genetically modified, you know, with these huge breasts. They look really freaky. They're not even avian. It's the same with the wheat. You look at the einkorn, it just looks so different.
It's a lot smaller, and it does react a lot differently when you're baking it. You'll notice that the crumb is very tight. It absorbs a different amount of water, and usually when you're cooking with whole grains, they absorb more water, but einkorn actually absorbs less, so you have to switch, you have to find the right swap for each ingredient that you're using. If you were to add the amount of water that you would add for a full yeast that's very absorbent, like a modern whole wheat, it rises a lot more, but also the whole wheat includes the bran, and what that does is it prevents the protein from stretching too much because the bran can be very tough, and the protein is it's a chain that they bind together when they get wet, and when it rises, when your yeast rises, it traps that. So you're not going to see that in the einkorn bread. It's a lot thicker. And what do you guys think about the flavor? So against a normal whole wheat bread, I'm sure you guys have all tried that. How do you feel the flavor compares?
I like this a lot better.
You like it a lot better?
Very good.
It has.
I mean, I could just eat this.
So one of the things to do is taste the einkorn on the little plates and taste the millet and see what you get. There's nothing wrong with eating raw whole grain. In fact, it's really, really good for your insides.
Excellent. So when you're cooking with whole grains, there are a couple of things that you need to consider. We talked about the water needing more or less depending on how much it absorbs. But also if you're going to incorporate whole grains into it, you need to either soak them. If they're a small grain like bulgur, you need to soak them in cold water for at least 6 hours, but preferably overnight, especially things like polenta, cracked corn, things like that. If you put it inside, they're just going to soak up the water that's already in your mix, and it's not going to make that water available to create the protein.
You know, I just want to go through, if some of you aren't used to cooking breads, I sort of taught myself how to cook breads, and nobody told me that you had to cook the grains before you made the bread. And so I would end up with this bread that tasted like it had little rocks and birdseed in it. And the easy way to do it is you can either cook the bulgur wheat or I like to cook with barley. I love barley. Barley's like my total favorite. I just cook it like I cook oatmeal. And then I just dump it in the bread. There's some of your water. And I also find it's easier for me to gauge the amount of water that I have to add to my bread, because then my whole grains aren't absorbing all the water and I'm not ending up with something that's structural, which is what I was doing before. So it's just a tip. I just cook it like oatmeal. You know, get it so that they're reasonably chewy and not hard anymore. And that'll also obviate a lot of the too little water problem. And if you end up with extra water, just dump it in. It has all that nice, you know, protein and everything in that water. Just dump it all in the bread.
Great. So if you're using whole grains, you want to cook them like a porridge and then add them in, but if you just want to soak them, like I did with the sunflower seeds here, just to soften them up, you just do that for 6 hours to overnight. If you're having an issue, does anybody not like the flavor of whole wheat? Some people think that it has a bitter texture to it because no? Okay, I didn't like it when I was growing up because I thought it was bitter, and I did some research on it and found out that it has phenolic compounds which make a tannic flavor, and that all comes from the bran. So when the bran, which is the outside husk of the seed, is taken away, welcome, then you don't get that. But that's also the part that is going to give it that fiber that you need, that's going to soak up all the extra
If you don't like that taste, and I don't like it, and if you don't like the yeast taste, I don't really like the taste of alcohol, just substitute about a half a cup of your water for orange juice. And it takes it right away. And what I do is, since I buy the orange juice here, I just make orange ice cubes. And if you take a half a cup of water and substitute it with the orange juice, magically the bitter taste, the tannins, which I don't like either, from the bran, and that winey flavor from the yeast, they just kind of really disappear. And your bread does not taste like orange. It does not make your bread taste orange.
No. That was actually something that I read in the King Arthur book, and I hadn't actually tried it yet, but it's interesting that you, yeah. So if you want to add things like corn, oats, and other unglutinous grains to your bread, you can expect that the rise is going to diminish because they're going to weigh it down and they're not going to have that protein in it. So if you're not gluten sensitive, you can try adding up to 10% of vital wheat gluten, which is just the 100% gluten protein that comes from the wheat. And you can add that in to help with your chew and your rise. If you are gluten sensitive, like your family is, I would stick to things that don't need a long rise and don't use yeast. So things like quick breads, like banana breads, are really easy to sub out a grain blend for, or scones or cookies, things that are crisp and that aren't really like fluffy.
We've tried breads, but they tend to be really dense.
They are really dense.
And they have a real gritty taste. Gritty, very
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. So the reason that they're dense is because the gluten protein is what traps the CO2 that is digested by the yeast, and that's creating the rise. So if you have nothing that's going to trap that air, you have to rely on chemical leaveners like baking soda, baking powder, to kind of get an extra oomph from your dough, but you're not going to get that kind of pull apart flavor of your bread.